Hello, we are In Conversation, a podcast from the School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University, designed to showcase timely and informative insights from leading faculty, researchers, and other experts, which impact the ever-changing social world we live in. Here at the School of Social and Family Dynamics, we recognize that the lands where we are hosting this conversation at Arizona State University belong to the Maricopa and Pima peoples, and we are privileged that we can welcome you to today's conversation.
Hi, everyone. On today's episode of In Conversation with the School of Social and Family Dynamics, there is a mature content warning, so viewers should be advised. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aubrey Hoffer, and I am your graduate student host of In Conversation with the School of Social and Family Dynamics. My awesome guest today is Aaron Thompson. Aaron is a master's student here in our sociology program, and he's had a fascinating trajectory to get here. First, he received his bachelor's degree in journalism and media studies from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and then he went into work in the English as a second language, or ESL world, for about 10 years before coming to ASU for his master's. Currently, he's doing really fascinating work in the Arizona Youth Identity Project right here at ASU. I'm so excited to find out more about him. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Aubrey. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Yeah. So the podcast starts and ends the same way. I'm going to ask you sort of 3 rapid fire questions. These introductory ones are just going to be icebreakers to get to know you better on a surface level. And then the ending ones are just to get quick bites of your personal philosophy. The point is just to kind of answer them off the cuff with about a sentence. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So my first question for you, Aaron, is what is your favorite late night snack?
Yeah, before the pandemic, I would probably say like ice cream. During the pandemic, it became like these little choco snacks from South Korea, called Choco Snack, I guess is their name. And then trying to get healthy now, it's navel oranges. So
All right. Good transition. All right. Question 2 is what is your favorite animal?
thinking about this one really quick, probably like chimpanzees, because like as a child, my first toy was this little chimpanzee, and also being surrounded by like I don't know if people will remember Curious George, but yeah, like that had an impact in there too. There's something that I was like watching about this idea of the was it like the Mandela effect, where you don't remember or you do remember facts in the past properly or improperly. And something that was really interesting to me was like this idea that Curious George never had a tail versus Curious George having a tail.
Yeah.
I remember him having a tail, but I guess he's never had a tail. So Mandela effect in action, I suppose.
Yeah, clearly you're from the parallel universe where Curious George did have a tail, and then something happened where, these universes broke apart, and then, now you're remembering from your parallel universe, which makes a lot more sense than just, people kind of collectively misremembering something, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna give a lot of shout outs to like media that I absorb and that I really enjoy because, as a sociology student, my life is based doom scrolling. So, with that being said, I try to immerse myself in things that are sort of odd and relevant in the like entertainment media sphere. And first thing about the Mandela effect is from this HBO show called was it like How to with John Wilson? Highly recommend it. There's an entire episode about the Mandela effect. That's he's just this filmmaker in New York who just tries to figure out something, and it takes him on these crazy adventures where he like ends up at a Mandela effect conference in a hotel in like the middle of nowhere. And yeah, that's been something that's been on my mind is, well, what do I remember correctly versus what I remember incorrectly? But as we know as social scientists, human memory is pretty fallible. Like we remember things very poorly as a whole. So
Yeah. All right, Aaron. So my third question for you is who is the funniest person that you know?
I lived in LA for about 7 years before I moved to Baltimore, where I live now. And I did get to meet a lot of people in the comedy industry. And someone that, again, because of that media thing, I have to mention is my friend and former colleague in Las Vegas, a journalist named Julie Seabaugh. And she just put out this incredible documentary called Too Soon, Comedy After 9/11. And you can watch it on Vice. And it's amazing. It's about how comedy has adapted after 9/11. And it's really relevant because it was the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And she's hilarious. Like, you don't get to see and hear her humor directly, but you can see how she's absolutely hilarious. One of the also best journalists I think I've met in my short but prolific journalism career. So
That is awesome. So this transitions pretty well into starting to talk about, your life as a professional and sort of your journey towards getting your master's. So you got your bachelor's degree in journalism, and then you sort of ended up in the ESL world. Talk to me a little bit about that transition. How did that come about?
So yeah, I've always been interested in like meeting and talking to people. As a kid, I was called like the radio by my grandparents because I love to talk to people and figure out their stories. So I went into studying journalism at UNLV and graduated with it. But at the same time, while I was studying it, I managed to get a job starting as an internship that ultimately ended up as a staff position at Las Vegas Weekly, which is an alternative weekly in Las Vegas. And I worked there for about 3 years, worked there through graduation, after graduation, and then so I'm in like 4 years, and then like in 2000, late 2008, I made a shift and went to another magazine or another alt weekly in Las Vegas called Las Vegas City Life, and I was there doing the same thing, covering the same kind of subjects that were, really interesting to me, like music, art, culture, underground culture, deviant cultures. Being in Las Vegas, there's more than enough of that to like listen to and find out about. And then in January of 2009, you get that meeting with the publisher that said, "Hey, our revenues are dropped, and sorry, you're onward." So I freelanced for a little bit, from January till about June, trying to find a new job. But, in the recession, this is like the beginning and the harshest part of the recession. Not a lot of journalism jobs. A lot of journalism companies were like heavily invested in real estate. So they're slashing everything. And ultimately, like, I got headhunted by some firm out of Korea that's like, "Hey, you have applied English experience. That's really cool. You are a professional writer. That's really cool. How would you like to come and teach in South Korea for a year?" And, like, I didn't really have any job prospects at that time. Like, I think my interview before I took that was with some like community paper at the LA Times, which it does not exist anymore. And yeah, basically from there, like, I got the job offer when I was covering Coachella for a bunch of magazines in Vegas. And I'm there with my editor at the time, just like, "Hey, I'm just going to Korea, and it's only going to be like a 1 year thing. And just going to try to, experience life somewhere else and try to make it." Because, being in Las Vegas, I'm from Las Vegas. I was born in Las Vegas, and I had a social structure that, and a safety net that I could always rely on because my family is like a third generation family in Las Vegas. Like, we go back to like the early 50s, and I just wanted to try something new. And yeah, 1 year turned into 4 years, and eventually I moved back in 2013. So
That is so fascinating. So when you moved to Korea, did you know any Korean?
no, I did not. I actually, so as a journalist, I love, surreal, strange stories. Like, again, my beat in Vegas was covering the most underground of the underground I could find. And I wanted to have this surreal, shocking experience. So I intentionally did no prep about Korea. Like, I just wanted to show up and see if I could survive. And so I knew very little, if any, Korean. I knew that like South Korea was a big country and different than North Korea. I mean, I had seen some Korean movies in the past and whatever, but I virtually knew nothing. So my first day getting off the plane in this brand new world, where there's as much neon as Vegas at the time too, it was like, okay, it's like Vegas. And then when I get dropped off the bus and my boss isn't there to pick me up, I'm like, oh yeah, no one speaks English around here, I don't think. This is 2009, and I'm like, I'll just figure something out. And eventually he came, he picked me up. But yeah, I was completely fresh. Like I wanted to have this surreal, intense experience, and it wasn't that intense. It was just more of like curiosity. Like, okay, cool. Well, let's see what I can do. And eventually, like after 4 years, my Korean got pretty solid. Unfortunately, when we moved back, or when I moved back in 2013, I moved back to Arizona, to Phoenix, and there was not the level of Korean infrastructure in Phoenix at the time I moved back in 2013, so I like forgot everything. Yeah,
I mean, it happens, right? But
yeah.
that is super cool. So, where were you located when you were living in Korea?
I was in Daegu, which is like the third largest city in Korea. Um, It's more or less in the center of the country. I was there for 2 years, and then I took a job with the Korean high school, working for the government in Seoul, which is like the capital. And yeah, those are two places I was at.
That's super cool. So then you decided to come back to the States, and then what were the career prospects like for you? Did you know that you wanted to kind of continue to be teaching English, or were you trying to go back to journalism? Where was kind of your head at when you came back to the States?
You know, I came back feeling very empowered in a lot of areas, but also very like I like to call it like buffet syndrome, where you have all these choices, but you don't know what to get. So you just end up getting the things you're comfortable with. But I had a little bit of savings, so I did wait to find jobs. But yeah, I tried to find journalism jobs, and in Arizona at the time, there really wasn't much hiring in early 2013 for that. I ended up settling working for a mortgage servicer just as a way to make some cash, and I was really good at this job, but I hated every minute of it. It's as someone who now studies disparity and studies systemic issues, I feel like when I was working as a mortgage servicer, having to talk to people about foreclosure and how they can lose their homes and all that stuff, like I really wanted to help them, but at the same time, it's like I'm just a part of the system now. That's not punk rock, you know?
Oh, it's so interesting because hearing you talk about, all of your different experiences, it seems like you've always really viewed everything around you with this like sociological lens, because it sounds like you've always really been interested in sort of the way that people operate and the way that people are interacting with each other. So it seems like it makes sense that you would eventually end up doing sociology.
Yeah, as a journalism major at UNLV, my minor was sociology in the first part, and I took it because it seemed most applicable to what I wanted to tell stories about. Most journalists, and again, I want to be a print journalist. So, print for those of you who read our newspapers and things that you pick up, not on the internet. And anyway, so I took sociology classes because I wanted to focus and tell stories about people who don't have their stories told, people who, are not represented in the media and in the news. So, and I had some great like sociology instructors who gave me access to these communities or helped like widen my like sociological imagination as C. Rhett Mills likes to explain, to think more about how can I represent these people, well, and talk about their story. And so my main area really in underground culture and stuff was focusing on what we would define as deviant subcultures, which in Las Vegas there's a lot to work with, but also the lens of deviance is very different compared to other cities and other places.
Right. I can imagine that deviant behavior in like Milwaukee is probably just, a day in Vegas, right?
Yeah, and so at UNLV there was a few really amazing researchers. There still are a few who work really heavily in deviance, but the one who was more like the person who set me on the direction that I wanted to study was a man named Frederick Preston, who a lot of his work involved working with like cowboy communities and cattle rustler communities. He wrote an entire book about, but he also liked to focus on BDSM communities in Las Vegas as well. And during one of our classes, he actually brought in one year he brought BDSM practitioners to class. I wasn't there for that one, but in my cohort or in my group, he actually brought in nudists. And it's just so interesting to just hear them talk about and hear them rationalize, as we say, their behavior. And it's always been kind of this focus, this lens, even when I was a journalist, is just focusing on telling the stories about people and really finding out, well, these groups of people in particular, what are their shared norms? What are their values that they find to be important? You know, what are their values that they think are deviant to them and so forth as well? I mean, I could probably talk about BDSM and the weird Vegas like punk rock and metal and music cultures like all day, but that's probably, well, maybe people would want to hear about that. Tune in for the next podcast about that.
Yeah, we'll do a separate podcast where we explicitly talk about BDSM and punk rock only. So, going back to kind of your work in ESL, you've had a lot of experience working closely with international students. Talk to me a little bit about that. Was that like when you worked with international students? It seems like when you talk about it that there were some like eye-opening moments for you, like hearing them talk about their experiences and sort of helping international students get adjusted to life in the States.
Yeah, that's a great point to kind of go off on is I lived that experience to some extent. Now, granted, like I'm an American, I'm white, and I have blonde hair, blue eyes. So even in foreign countries, specifically in Asia, I am afforded a certain level of privilege that other minorities and other individuals don't have. Um, but still, living in another country, being a stranger in another country, there are, you know, mental and psychological and personal challenges every day in order to cope, like from the simplest thing, like what am I going to eat for lunch? How do I communicate what I want to this person who's going to take my order so I get the right thing versus like, oh, I'm having an emergency. I need to talk to a doctor to, solve this problem. I broke my arm and collarbone in Korea. And then my Korean was good enough that I could communicate, but I think about if I couldn't communicate, what would happen. So when I came back to the United States and I got back into the ESL industry, I took about a year off from that. It became really important to me to give people the power to communicate, because we know communication is a very powerful tool also for survival. And dealing with students from other countries, in LA, it's a very diverse group, but we would have students who, were coming in to study for university. We were a language school, so a lot of our students were trying to improve their scores, like the TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language, or IELTS. I don't know the acronym for that one as well as I wish I did. Uh, IELTS is mainly only for European countries, not so much like TOEFL. But, so getting to know international students' wants and needs and hopes was really fun. But then when life happens, seeing and trying to help students help themselves was always really inspiring and delightful, but also really like brutal in some cases too. I had one student, he really nice young guy, but being in LA, first of all, he was a member of the LGBTQ community, and he's also like Japanese and Vietnamese, so he already has a lot of stigma from his family. He had to keep himself in the closet, so to speak, from his family. Comes to the United States, starts hanging out in West Hollywood, gets involved in some of the wrong communities, and next thing we know, he's disappeared, and we don't know where he's at. So, using my journalism skills, I track him down. I find out that he was in jail. He had been arrested for possession, and turns out, like when we did get to talk to him and find out what was going on with him, he had gone into this like abusive relationship with a partner who was pimping him out, and it was really rough. And those are the hardest because I knew this student before he came to our school through another school, and I was really trying to get a hold of his people, get a hold of his parents, and really help him come back to the world as he knew it. And we did end up getting him help. We we ended up finding a nice, like, low cost, affordable treatment program for him. And suffice to say, I believe he's doing okay. But, with addiction, as, social scientist listeners out there will know, is so multifaceted. You never really know. You're never really okay. You're just living with it. So,
Right. That story really resonates with me as someone who is queer, right? I can
yeah.
imagine how difficult it must be when, I mean, and I have experienced what it's like
Yeah.
when you have a family who isn't fully accepting of yourself and your identity. And I'm sure going to a new place, wanting to find a group that you identify with, I mean, it puts you in a position where you're incredibly vulnerable. So, I think it's really, you know, it's really good on you that you were able to sort of track the student down and try to get him out of that situation. I mean, that really, like, as someone who is like not a family member or friend, I mean, like, that probably wasn't your
No.
responsibility, but it is really, I think, speaks well that you were willing to do that for someone. So I thought that
Well,
was very cool to hear.
as when I was in Korea, it was always imparted upon us by our leadership as well as by, advocates, as like, be a resource for help and change within the community. Because again, the being in a monocultural society like Korea, the lens is always on you if you're not like Korean. So you want to be a good ambassador, right? Always. That was always what, our leaders and the education programs would tell us. And then, coming to the United States, I wanted to just continue to be that sort of good role model for international students so I could help them their day-to-day lives, but also, give them safety nets that maybe they wouldn't have. I mean, the kind of we don't want to make it sound just, but the most common problem though with international students in Los Angeles was trying to keep the Church of Scientology away from them, or other sort of fringe religions away from international students, because they recruit really heavily with international students because they have a lack of connections, they have lack of ties, and they're easier to sort of segment away from like general groups. And that was always pretty interesting when a student would come and say, "Hey, I got this flyer," and it's a flyer from Scientology group, which is really prevalent in Los Angeles, specifically in Hollywood. And going, "Yeah, do you want to be in the industry? No, you just stay away from them." And it's like stuff like that, like any pitfall. Again, when you're in a critical population, no matter if you're an international student, or no matter if you're in a what we call a disparate population, or you're a member of a minority group, or any of these kind of groups in general, there's so many pitfalls, and it's just really trying to navigate people away from them so they don't end up in situations that ultimately could be horrifically life changing. That's a responsibility that I feel as a person. But now, as I've become someone who's interested in social science, figuring out the systemic ways to minimize these pitfalls, or figure out the systemic issues around them so I can tackle these pitfalls with colleagues and team members to try to make a better, subjectively better society.
Right. It reminds me of that sort of metaphor or story. I'm about to butcher something that I was told many times in my educational career. But I think the metaphor is described as like there's this running river, and this person, and there's these children that are like floating down the river. And this guy sees them and he's like, oh my God, there's these children in the river. And he's going and he's trying to save each individual child. And then eventually he reaches the point where he's like, okay, like, why are there all these children in the water? And then he sort of walks up the stream to tackle that problem. And it sounds like you've sort of had a similar thing where you're sort of doing this work at the individual level, which is incredibly important, right? Like, I'm in no
Yeah.
way discrediting that at all, but there's got to be a point where we sort of look at the system and we go, okay, why are there so many individuals who are going through this experience? And it sounds like that's something that has really informed a lot of your perspective.
Right. And speaking to that too, a little job that I had between LA and Phoenix, I was working at the Pride Guide, which is a LGBTQ travel magazine. I was a ad salesperson at this magazine. It's based out of Phoenix. And one thing that was really important to me, again, because I like to tackle these big issues, was, well, we know that, LGBTQ access to healthcare is a huge issue. And my market was specifically like rural Colorado. So rather than just go after the easy sales, I would approach every single like doctor or every single provider and reach out to them and say, hey, you should advertise to this community if you're comfortable working in the communities, because it's like these little systemic and these little individual actions that can have huge wide ranging changes. I mean, again, we think about like this idea of the activist sociologist, which is what I think we need at this time frame that we're living in. I mean, 2020 has basically just been a magnifier of all the social inequities that are in our society. And, at this point, for those of us who are interested in academic sociology, this is really a chance where we can make an impact to really change things and understand them and promote like a new era. I mean, I was really optimistic in my essay that I wrote to get in the program. I said, this is the new golden age of social science research. We're at the beginning of it, but this is it. We just need to make sure that we get funding for it. So what's up, NIH?
Yeah. No, that's beautifully said, Aaron. I do want to take a minute to highlight some of the work that you're doing right now. So, can you tell me a little bit about the Arizona Youth Identity Project and what your role has been on that project?
So yeah, the Arizona Youth Identity Project is this amazing program that the Sanford School has been heading up. It's a project that is basically trying to understand the political, social, and racial identities of young people in Arizona. It's really interesting. I highly recommend anyone listening to this take a look at their webpage, which you can find on the Sanford site. But basically, the idea is comes from like the principal investigator, which is Dr. Flores Gonzalez, and the co-investigators, Dr. Amir Estrada out of ASU, Dr. Angela Gonzalez out of ASU, Dr. Nathan Martin out of ASU, and then also, you got Michelle Teres out of NAU, and Dr. Atkin, who just left for Purdue, which we're really sad about. And you also have like Dr. Pasco involved in there, Dr. Michelle Pasco, and I don't want to leave anyone else off on it. But what makes it really interesting at the end of the day is that this work is really it's one of the largest sociological projects in the country now. It's a qualitative project, not a quantitative project. So the end goal is to interview, more than 300 young individuals in Arizona about their race, about their identity, about their political identity, about their social identity, and at the end of the day, what does it really mean to be an American? There are a bunch of research questions that we're looking at. My work, I came in later involved in it. I joined it as a class because I wanted to get more research experience, and I talked to my advisor who, I was really lucky that this class was going on online using Sync, ASU Sync at the time. I'm an ASU online student, so typically I wouldn't have this opportunity short of having to come to Arizona and take the physical class. So I got really lucky that I was able to join this class and learn about like qualitative coding, interviewing, and I became a research assistant for it in the summer, doing interviews for the third wave. This is a longitudinal study, and the research is really fascinating. There's some really, really important things that we're finding out about people, and we're going to be publishing and writing about it. We're writing about it right now. There's a ton of stuff out there. I mean, they're going to be looking at the data. We're going to be looking at this data for years. There's just so much because it's a qualitative, longitudinal study of more than 300 individuals with some of them interviewing 3 times. And it's just really interesting because we're finding out that things are changing very quickly, especially with identities and attitudes in Arizona, which could potentially generalize to other Western states or other more conservative states as well. I can't really go into too many of the results yet, but I'd say just keep an eye out. Stuff will be coming soon.
Yeah, that sounds like that is a great opportunity that you were able to be involved in during grad school. So, as we're starting to wrap up, one of my questions is, what's next for you? So, I think you mentioned previously that you're starting to think about applying to PhD programs. Where are you at with that? Are you thinking of going to the private sector? Where are you at with, what your next step is going to be?
If I have any regrets about signing up for a master's program during the pandemic, and I kind of did it sort of, seeing the world kind of falling apart in front of your eyes, being someone who's always had this sociological sphere and lens, um, I didn't really look into, I just wanted to take a class and classes, and I was working full time at the time. So I picked the ASU program, and a little later realized that was more of a terminal program, which means, it's not really geared for those who are necessarily interested in like long term academic study into PhD programs. I should have done a little better homework, but that's fine. I've had great opportunities, and I've definitely learned a lot in my year and a half there. I've taken probably more classes than I have in most of my life. But in terms of the next steps are, so I'm graduating A, so I am interested in the PhD track. I'm really interested in applying to, various schools and stuff like that, studying areas of like what I'm interested in, which is, digital disparity in particular, because I was running an ESL school during the pandemic. Also studying elements of, media and political information and identity in terms of, well, how is the media as we know it changing people's political identities? There's a lot of stuff out there to go for. So, I've got my hands full. I got to find some cool schools. I'm hoping, now that I live in Maryland, there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of schools out here. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that that sounds great. And, I have a ton of colleagues who entered their PhD program postmasters. And honestly, it's the postmaster students who kill it the most in the PhD programs. And that's a little bit of a self roast because I came in pre-masters, but it really is. I mean, when you
Well,
go
we're
in,
crazy.
no, I love it's incredible. I mean, every colleague I have who came in postmasters, they just kill it. Absolutely. And it's because you go in knowing what you want to do. You've got all of this experience and it's just incredible. So, Aaron, I have no doubt that you're going to find an awesome home wherever you end up, and ASU has been so lucky to have you while we have. So,
It's fun to be back at ASU. It's different, obviously. I did my first year of my undergrad at ASU in like 2003, and it's interesting to be back. When I signed up for the classes again, I have one of the really old legacy emails. That's like your full name. When I had to call help desk about that, they're like, "Wow, you have one of those really old emails that hasn't ported over." It's like, yeah, can you fix that? But yeah, it's, really what it comes down to is as social scientists, no matter where you are, if you want to be, if you're interested in the more clinical area of social science, which is super important, more important now than ever, that's really awesome to just keep yourself centered. And same as if you're interested in the research and, academic aspect is keeping yourself centered too, because remember, we're dealing with people, and people are unique and they're layered, and there's so much going on between individuals as well as groups, and we just have to take care of the people we research and the people we help with. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess I get a little bit of some slack because I'm interested in, big. I don't want to work with like, I don't want to be a social service provider or any of that at this time, but I still want to understand so we can help everybody, but also so we can understand how things are changing. And I got to give a shout out to how amazing ASU has been in terms of promoting really the values of modern sociology. Something that's amazing about Arizona Youth Identity Project is that it's female and POC led, which is incredible. For a project this size, having those kind of, I want to say, those factors and elements being so important to the leadership is so cool. And ASU's leadership of the division right now is, currently female and POC led. And it's really, I think, a great way of showing that, sociology gets a lot of flack, and rightfully so, that it's a social science study made by old white European men. And it does deserve that flack. It really does. And this next stage of sociology, I think, is really going to be interesting and amazing, and really helpful for society as a whole, because now we do recognize, as social scientists, we recognize things that are different than old white capitalist archetypes. That's cool. And being a part of that is very inspiring, but it also means, too, again, me being a white male in this program, it also means that, hey, I definitely got to step up my own game, because I can't just get by being a white dude anymore in academia, right?
I love that. That was beautifully said, Aaron. So we're going to start to transition out, and I am going to give you our three final questions. So these are the questions where I'm really going to try to get just a little bit more in your personal philosophy. Okay. So my first question for you is, who or what motivates you?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think what motivates me, it's more of like a what motivates me than a who. What really motivates me is just this drive to do the best I can on anything I can. And yeah, I fail all the time. Failure happens. Accept it. Like, if there's anything I can say to any future graduate students or future college students, hey, failure happens. Accept it and learn from it and move on. So it's really just the drive to just want to do, more than anything. Like, I can't stand still. I can't stay still. Even like that, I'm just a full-time student right now. I can't handle it. Like, I'm running analyses on my own. I'm doing crazy things with, wave 4 data. I'm breaking my computer with SPSS just for fun, stuff like that. And, it's just do. That's my motivation, is just to do, I guess, is the best way to say.
Yeah, I love that. So, my second question for you is, what has been your proudest moment in grad school?
Hmm. You know, that's a really good question. Our program is so short, so we don't have a lot of opportunities to really get ingrained into anything. I mean, again, talking about Arizona Youth Identity Project, I got really lucky on this one. I talked to my advisor and I got involved in the program, which is really cool. There aren't a lot of opportunities like that, but when I think about what I'm most proud of with that, is really being able to contribute in a small part to this incredible project. Just, even from interviewing and coding to now being able to work on this paper, or work on one of these several papers coming out. It does make me really proud, because, the focus has been on Arizona politically since the 2020 elections. How did Arizona go blue? It's not really blue, it's purple. We know that. And it's like stuff like that, being a part of this project that can potentially answer a question like that, and how individual activist groups have influenced, and this is in the media, about how individual activist groups really help influence and push voting in Arizona, where the party infrastructure, the Democratic Party infrastructure in Arizona just kind of didn't. That's also really cool. So I'm just proud to be a part of that, but also proud to be a part of such a cool and great program that is in flux, that is in transition, and is just doing all the right things in terms of, sociological study, which is a controversial field that ruffles a lot of political feathers, and is being cut at other institutions because it's not like necessarily a productive quote unquote science. And, we could talk about the, debate between like qualitative research versus quantitative research, which appears to be like people still want quantitative research, right? But what we're hoping, again, and what is being hoped in the Arizona Youth Identity Project, is that it will be a part of something that shows, hey, qualitative research can matter just as much as quantitative research. And yeah, if I don't get a publisher credit, let's say my paper gets rejected, or let's say worst comes to worst, like I have to drop out of the program. Even being a small part of that is something that I think I can speak for the fellow students and parts of the class and say we're really proud of, because it has a direct impact on what's going on in Arizona in particular.
That was beautifully said. It's clear that you have a lot of passion for this work, which is fantastic.
I try.
So, yeah, well, you succeed. So, my final question that we're going to end on, Aaron, is what is one rule that you would want everyone to follow?
Like everyone in the world or everyone in general?
Just everyone, however you want to interpret everyone.
So I just moved to Baltimore, and I'm from Las Vegas, and I lived in LA, and people have I've lived in all these general places, and something that I really love out here in Maryland is this general rule. I can't, this is a family podcast, I suppose, so I can't really say how I want to, but it's just people are not jerks to each other. People are pretty kind and pretty nice to each other, at least superficially. Yeah, that's cool. Like, be nice to each other, be kind to each other. Don't be a jerk, you know?
I think
Uh,
don't be a jerk is a great rule to live by. So, this has been a fantastic interview. I've been so happy to have you on, Aaron, and this has just been a joy. So, thank you so much. If you're interested in more of the work that Aaron does, or if you're interested in contacting him, his information is going to be below in the show notes. So, thank you all for listening. Have a
yeah,
good one.
and one last thought in that too is, and if you are interested in learning more about Arizona Youth Identity Project, please visit our website in the Sanford School page, and you'll be able to find a bunch of really cool stuff in there. Again, I only speak this as someone who's just a part of it, but man, we are doing great stuff. And again, it really comes all thanks to the PIs involved in this. I mean, they're heroes. Like, they really are heroes of sociology. So visit that. And thank you for listening to my rants, y'all.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Connect with us and get access to all of our podcasts by visiting thesanfordschool.asu.edu/podcast, where you will also find links to all of our social media channels. This conversation has come to an end, but our work here continues.